this is the BMW M2. Codename G87 is the replacement for the F87, and as you can see, it has entirely new styling. The front end is all different, and that might come as a bit of a shock to some because the previous M2 was beloved for its looks. This one, though, is quite a bit different. Interestingly, it's also quite a bit different from the 2 Series on which it's based. While the headlights are the same, the grille is different. It's much squarer, as you can see, has harsh right angles, whereas the M2s are prettier and kind of more well-loved, to be honest. As you can see down here, its front air intakes are also pretty much perfect squares, which is a little odd. And it has a black centerpiece in the bumper, which makes the vents on the side kind of come down in little weird square shapes. It's an odd look. Some people love it, some people don't, but it's definitely an interesting, aggressive look. You also get the big hood bulge there, which again, some people love, some people don't. Here is where people get a little controversial about it. If you look at it from this angle, it's very kind of square again. The hood line is very flat from the hood bulge and then kind of drops down and then very square. It's just an unusual look, especially with such a short front overhang. The wheels are very cool. They are 19s in the front, 20s in the back, and they do look very good, although I think the M Performance wheel looks a little bit better, but bright red brake calipers, which is something kind of new for modern BMW M cars. If you go down the side here, you can see this really sharp, again, right angle that comes up into the flared wheel arch that you can see right there. So it comes up and kind of flares around like that. Very similar to the boxy flares of the original E30 M3, but not quite as aggressive as those. If you come around to the back, the M2 has pretty much the same look as the standard 2 Series, except for quad exhausts, and as you can see, much wider hips. Personally, I like the back end of the M2. I know many people find it controversial. I think it looks cool, and I like the little funky, odd-shaped taillights. I like them. Overall, the M2 is a pretty cool looking car. It's very short and boxy looking. I don't love the grills, but that's kind of a commonplace with modern BMWs now. I wish BMW stuck with just the standard 2 Series grills, because I think they look much better. But aside from that, this is a very cool looking little car. It's very aggressive, it's very butch, and has a ton of road presence. So now, let's take it for a drive. So what is the last gas-powered BMW M2 actually like to drive? The majority of M2 owners are going to do what I'm doing right now. Drive it on the street. While some owners might occasionally take this to the track, this is predominantly a street car. And that's sort of always been the point of M cars, at least small M cars like this one. They're meant to be daily driven sports cars, cars that you can drive to the office every day and then have a ton of fun and relieve some stress on the way home. So how does BMW's latest baby M car actually handle the task of being a baby M car? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest with you, more so than I thought it would be. But first, let's start with the basics. Up front, there is a 3-liter twin-turbocharged straight-six engine. It's the same S58 engine as you'll find in the BMW M3 and M4, except this one is a little bit detuned, so it only makes 453 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque. That's about 20 fewer horses than the standard BMW M3. However, this car feels a lot like the standard BMW M3. The one I'm driving has a 6-speed manual. There's an 8-speed automatic available, but it's important to note that this has the manual for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that it's just more fun. And the second reason is that this car feels like the manual M3 to drive. This powertrain feels like the manual M3's powertrain. If you've driven a manual M3, you'd know that it doesn't feel anywhere near as potent as the automatic one. In the manual M3, it kind of feels like the engine, I don't want to say is gutless under 3,000 RPM or 3,500 RPM, but it definitely feels much more potent at the top end, whereas in the automatic one, it just feels ballistic all of the time, forever. A lot of it has to do with gearing. The automatic is just geared better for performance, for a whole number of reasons based on fuel economy and emissions and all that sort of thing. But since this one has the manual, I'm noticing it reminds me a lot of that manual M3, where it doesn't feel quite as alive as the M3 competition with the automatic does. So I'm wondering if this car would feel more alive and more exciting with the automatic, just like the M3 does. Now, I haven't driven the automatic version. This is the only M2 I've driven so far, so I can't say for sure. But I will say that this one doesn't feel quite as exciting or quite as powerful as I imagined it would be. Not that I'm disappointed, because it's still very fast, and trust me, I think having the manual is worth the small performance trade-off just because it's a manual. But I am a little bit surprised at how unpunchy it feels. It does not feel as powerful as 453 horsepower sounds like it would in a car this size. I mean, it's still fun though. It's still fast. Now, there's another important thing to note about this. In the manual M3, I've complained over and over and over and over again about how much I don't like it. And I'm not the only one. There have been a lot of journalists and other enthusiasts who've complained about the shift quality in the M3, and it's not so much the shift quality, it's mostly the clutch. A lot of BMW shifters, most BMW shifters, are rubbery and kind of overly notchy. They're not the best feeling shifters, but that's okay, they're fine, and it's just nice to have a manual. But in the M3, the clutch was exhausting. It was like an on-off switch. It was very hard to be smooth. It was very hard to judge where the engagement point was, and I just didn't like using it. It was very frustrating to me. This one, now, I'm sure BMW will say it's the same manual, it's the same clutch, it's the same everything, just carry over to the M2. But for some reason, maybe it's just that I haven't driven the M3 in a year, but for some reason, this one feels a little bit better. I feel like it's a bit more predictable and I can use it better. It's also a little bit better in traffic. I feel like I can be smoother with it. I feel like I can engage with it better. And maybe that's just me getting used to it, but I definitely felt no learning curve in this versus when I drive the M3, I feel like I'm constantly trying to learn it every time I drive it. It feels like a constant battle between me and the clutch, whereas this feels less so. This feels more predictable and more natural. And I like driving this much better than I remember driving the manual M3. So that's something important to note. Now, in around town driving, the M2 is fine. It's a little bit stiff. It is a little bit overly stiff, I will say that. And I don't remember the previous M2 riding this firmly. I remember the previous M2 having a bit more nuance to its suspension than this. This feels a little bit crashier than I remember. However, in fairness, the last F87, the previous generation M2 I drove, was the CS, and that drove a little bit better. So maybe this is better than the previous M2. It's really hard for me to tell, but it is very stiff. You feel everything. You go over a couple of hard bumps and you're gonna, you might need new fillings in your teeth. However, it isn't so stiff and so firm that you can drive it every day. You absolutely could. However, I wouldn't recommend driving it every day if you have car seats in the back, because this is not a comfortable car for having kiddos in the back seat, as I shall now explain. So I'm going to show you how to get in the back of a BMW M2. Now, being a coupe, it's really not that different from getting in the back of every other coupe, but it's not great. So let me show you. So you pull on the little strap here, and the seat releases and it moves forward. That's pretty typical. Then you climb in the back, and it's not so bad. And then once I move the seat back, now I'm sitting behind myself, so it's the seating position that I like. I'm about 5'9", 170 pounds, so I fit in the back of most cars, to be honest with you. And knee room, I'm okay. Not only are my knees not touching the back in like a normal position, but the two holes in the seats actually give my knees maybe an extra inch or so of space, so I can kind of stretch my legs or like back out like a little bit, which is nice. I said I'm 5'9", so I'm incredibly average, borderline short. And I have to be hunched or my head is touching the headliner, and this isn't even sitting all the way upright. I'm still kind of hunched and my head's still touching. So that isn't great, especially because this is a very bumpy, bouncy car. It's very, very stiff. So when you go over bumps, it's, you know, I'm going to be smacking my head against the ceiling quite often. So you don't want adults larger than me in here. I don't even want to be back here for very long. So adults larger than me will struggle. Another thing is car seats are atrocious back here. I don't have them back here now because then I wouldn't be able to fit. But getting a child, like a small baby in a reverse-facing car seat in here is almost impossible. You have to climb in the back, step in here, then swing the baby through this way and into the seat. And it's incredibly difficult and not very fun. So if you have children, this is not the car for you. Now, one of the things you might do with this car, if it is your daily driving sports car, is commute. Take it on the highway. You might have to take the highway for maybe 25 minutes, a half hour, maybe even an hour every single day in this car. So what is it like when you actually have to stretch its legs and go a big long distance in a straight line? It's not bad. It's not bad. For a relatively small car with a short wheelbase, it tracks really well. A lot of times small sports cars that have short wheelbases and really nippy steering tend to be a bit twitchy, a bit nervous at high speed because that's really not their strength. And admittedly, that's not this car's strength either. However, it is stable enough at high speed, it is smooth enough at high speed, where you could drive this every day and it not exhaust you on a highway. Would I prefer something more like an M4 if I'm going to be commuting every day? Yes, I would, because it has a longer wheelbase and it is a little bit more stable at high speed. Not that this isn't stable, but it's just a little bit twitchier thanks to that shorter wheelbase. I will say this though, if you are going to use this car as a daily highway cruiser, don't get the manual, get the automatic. And the reason for that is in 6th gear, at about 75 miles per hour, I'm turning between 25 and 3,000 RPM. And it's just that perfect resonance to get annoying after a while. It's not super loud, it's just kind of annoying after, a half hour to an hour of just constant kind of droning along. And I have the active sound off, so if I turn the active exhaust sound on, you get a little bit more droning. It's not terrible, but it's annoying. You don't buy an M2 for its around town driving or its highway cruising. You buy an M2 because you want to have some fun. Whether it's on a twisty road or on a track, you want to have a little bit of fun. So what happens when the road opens up and you actually get to turn the steering wheel a little bit? Well, the M2 is not bad. That sounds like I'm damning it with faint praise, and I guess maybe I am, but it's different than I expected it to be. So the previous Gen M2, the F87, was this beautifully delicate sports car. It had lovely steering. The chassis felt playful and balanced. It was a very as pure as you're going to get from a modern BMW sports car. Fast forward to the current M3, and you have what is the only thing I can describe the M3 as is a 4-door Nissan GT-R, and I mean that as a compliment. It is one of the most brutal driving experiences I've ever had, and it's fantastic for it. Epic levels of grip, incredible power, razor sharp front end and steering. Some of the sharpest steering I've ever experienced in a car is from the new M3. But then I jump in this, and I was expecting a mini M3, M4. I was expecting something with that brutality, that ridiculously razor-sharp steering. But I didn't get that. Instead, I get sort of this hybrid, this halfway point between both cars. The brutality of the new M3 and the delicacy of the previous M2, but it kind of seems like it doesn't know what to be. Because this car has the same subframe and suspension setup as the M4, it has that sort of incredible superhero grip feeling of that car. But its steering isn't anywhere near as razor sharp, at least from what I remember. It doesn't feel like it has that unbelievable precision as the M3 and M4. So what I'm getting is this weird disconnect. It feels like it has the steering of a more delicate car. I actually kind of might enjoy the steering on the M2 more than I do on the M4, because it kind of feels a little bit more natural than the almost artificially fast M4. But then the chassis has all of this incredible grip, and it kind of feels unflappable. So I'm not really sure how I want to drive this car. Do I want to drive it with that same brutality, or do I want to be more delicate and kind of chuck it into corners? It doesn't really feel like it wants to be chucked into corners like that. It's weird. I'm kind of confused by this car, to be honest with you. I will say that the more I drive it, the more I like it. It is growing on me. It is a fun car to drive. Do I like it more than the previous M2? I don't think so. I think I like the previous M2 more. I think that car had more of a traditional sports car feel, where this one feels grippier, it feels more aggressive. One thing I will say about the steering is that it has to be in sport mode, because in comfort mode it is way too light. And I'm okay with light steering, but it just feels way too video game light, and it's not great for an M car. Now, this M2 has these carbon fiber backed sport buckets. They're the same sport buckets you can get in the M3 and M4. They're the same ones that were in the M5 CS. They're BMW's newest, sportiest seat. They aren't the crazy fixed ones you get in the M4 CSL, but they're the common carbon sport bucket. And since they're the same as the M3 and M4, if you liked them in that car, you'll like them in this one. They are very snug. I am a relatively small guy, maybe not as small this way as I used to be, but width-wise, I'm a skinny guy. I'm a narrow person. I'm only 5'9". I'm only about 170 pounds. I am not a large person, and these at the widest, with the bolster set to their widest setting, I am snug in here. I have no room at all. In fact, it's almost too snug for me. And I'm small. I can only imagine how uncomfortable a bigger person might be in these seats. Now, I like them. I think they're cool. I think they feel sporty. I will admit, they're not the most comfortable of seat. I feel very kind of claustrophobic in them. But I like them in a car like this. They make this car feel special. They make it feel exciting. They make it feel different from your normal, 2 Series. They also look fantastic. I love these ones with the blue and the top shoulder bolster there. I think that's really cool. And overall, I do really like them. Some people might not. If you didn't in the M3, you won't in this. But I think they're cool, and I'm glad that BMW puts them in the M2. I want to see them on more M cars, to be honest, because I really like them. Also new to this car is iDrive 8. It's the same as every other iDrive 8 car, so I'm not going to rehash that and go back into all that. I will say this is the M version of iDrive 8, so it is the M gauges, which I do like a lot more than the normal ones. And if you press the M mode button here, you kind of can switch how the gauges and how everything looks. So I can't activate track mode right now because I'm driving, but I can go into sport, and that changes the look of the gauges and makes them simpler, a little bit easier to use. That's great. But I just like the simple road ones. It's just a little bit easier to see for me. It's 2 gauges. You get your speed on one side, tack and gear on the other side. It's perfect. It's nice and simple and easy. Give me simple gauges and I'm happy. Head-up display's cool, but it's too much for me. Now, if you buy an M2, you're not buying a tiny little BMW M2 because of its daily driving and commuting capabilities. You buy an M2 because you want to have fun. So what is the M2 like when the road gets a little twistier? Now, I have this car set up with the engine in sport, the chassis in comfort, the steering in sport, and the brakes in sport. I also do have the gear shift assistant and the rev match on because I'm not great at rev matching because I got little narrow feet. So, how does this thing handle? Well, aside from tossing all of my stuff across the car, it handles very well. It is a shockingly capable little car. However, I'm not quite so sure I like it more than the previous gen F87 M2. See, this car confuses me a little bit because it is immensely impressive. So despite being shorter than the M4, this car actually has the same subframe and suspension setup as the M4. So it's just as wide, it's just as capable, it's just as grippy. The problem that I have with this is that it doesn't have the same razor-sharp steering response as the M4. And its steering is a little bit too light and a little bit too vague. You know, the M3 and M4 kind of lean hard into their almost GTR-like levels of brutality, where the previous M2 was very delicate. It was a very delicate sports car, it was very balanced, it kind of flowed with you, and it wasn't necessarily, I wouldn't say it's tail happy, the old M2, but it definitely had a very playful back end that was very easy to control. Where this, it's kind of in between, and I don't really know if it knows what it wants to be. Now, it's not bad, it's very fun, and it is very impressive what it can do, but I'm not getting that same sense of connection as I did with the previous M2, and I'm not getting the same sort of awestruck fascination that I did with the M3 and M4. However, in its defense, I felt the same way about the manual M3. I've never driven a manual M4, but I've driven the manual M3. It's basically the same thing. And I kind of had the same feeling where I didn't really love it. And I think that has a lot to do with the powertrain and the gearing. I think with the automatic and the better gearing, it has that more brutal feel to it. And I kind of want that in this. So I would very much like to drive this with an automatic, which seems odd. I kind of want to see what this powertrain feels like with the automatic. I want to address something that came up in a recent Throttle House review of this car. Now, in that review, they said that when you're in fourth gear at about 30 miles per hour, there's just not enough torque to move the car effectively. And they demonstrated that by putting it in fourth gear at 30 miles per hour and putting their foot to the floor. Now, I kind of understand where they're coming from. I actually do understand where they're coming from. In a lot of manual sports cars, you don't want to have to downshift constantly to get power. So if you're in fourth gear, kind of just cruising at whatever speed you're cruising at, and let's say someone slows down in front of you or whatever, and you want to get around them, you don't always feel like downshifting, especially if it's in like a really quick environment, you need to hurry up. You want to be able to put your foot down and go. However, there's a legitimate reason for why this car isn't great at that, and why a lot of manual modern sports cars aren't great at that. And the reason is gearing, and I shall demonstrate right now. I'm at 30 in fourth gear, foot down to the floor. It's not horrible, as you saw. It's not terrible, but it's not great. It's not amazing, but of course it isn't, because this car is very, very long gearing. So second gear can probably get me to 50, 60 miles per hour. Second gear is very tall. Now, the reason it's so slow to accelerate in fourth gear at 30 miles per hour is due to a number of reasons, most of which is ridiculous fuel economy regulations that make manuals difficult to regulate and comply with. And there's even noise regulations that car companies have to deal with, where manuals struggle because you have to test it at at third gear, wide open throttle, so they kind of make third gear tall so that You know, you're at a low speed, a wide open throttle, low RPM, and you know, there's a number of reasons. Not to also kind of say, listen to what these other guys said instead of us, but Jason Camisa at Hagerty has a great explanation as to why manuals are geared so long, and I'm not going to lie, I don't think I can explain technical things better than Jason Camisa. So he has a great video on that. It's well worth watching, but it explains why manuals are geared so long in modern sports cars, most of them at least. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't like that, I want to be able to have a lot of torque in all gears. Well, you can't have everything, so just be happy that we have manuals, even though the gearing is kind of tall and annoying. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't like that, I wanted to have enough torque in 4th gear, 5th gear, whatever, to be able to put my foot down and go somewhere and not have to downshift all the time. Okay, well, then maybe a manual's not for you, to be honest with you, because the whole point of having a manual is so you can shift gears, because it's fun. And with auto rev matching, it makes it easier than ever. I actually enjoy auto rev matching in modern cars because it's so good, it makes daily driving it so much easier, and then when you want to have fun and blip the throttle, you turn it off, easy peasy. So it makes it nice and easy. Who cares if you have to downshift? Another thing is, if you are driving consistently at 30 miles per hour, you need to put your foot down and can't downshift, you're probably not going to be in 4th gear. You're probably going to be in 2nd gear in this car, or even 3rd gear, where you would have enough torque for that to be okay. But 4th gear is not a gear you're going to be cruising at 30 miles per hour in. And if you are just kind of cruising at 30, you're going to be in 5th or 6th, just kind of chilling out for fuel economy purposes. So 4th, it's an unrealistic test. I understand why Throttle House did it. If you're in 4th gear and you do have to, to mat the throttle at about that speed because you've slowed down or something, you're going to have to downshift. You're just going to have to downshift. There's not enough torque to quickly move you, away from traffic or out of the way or to avoid something. So you're going to have to downshift. So the BMW M2 as a whole, what is the verdict on the M2? Is it a good car? Is it a bad car? Is it worth buying? Is it worth getting rid of your old M2 for? Sure, there's a really easy answer for this car because it isn't a slam dunk success over the previous M2. It's not better than the previous M2 in every way. Also, it's quite expensive. This car, as tested, is a very expensive car. So you can step up to an M3 or M4 for not much more money. And in many ways, I actually find that the M3 and M4 can be more fun than this car. So it's not so cut and dried where you say, well, the M2 is the M2, that's the one you want. I'm not so sure. There's a lot of good things about it. I like its size. It's easy to place on the road. I like the way it looks better than the M4, quite a bit better. I think it's a cool little car. I like the amount of power you get in this. It's not too much. It's not too wily. I think that the manual in this is better than the manual in the M4 somehow. Maybe I'm crazy, but that's what I'm noticing. And it is a very fun car to drive. It does have responsive steering. It has a balanced chassis. It's easy to play with the back end without killing yourself. This is a fun little car. However, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I think if I were to buy this car, I would buy an M2 with the automatic transmission. And I can't believe I'm saying that. It actually kind of bothers me that I'm saying that because I want manuals to still exist. I love the fact that this still exists with a manual, but I actually think that it would be better with an automatic because this same engine is better with an automatic in the M3 and M4. So I'm just kind of extrapolating there and assuming that it would be better in this as well with an automatic. That does bother me though, because I do wish that the manual was better. Also, I don't think if I had an F87, the previous generation M2, I don't think that I would want to step up into this. I think I'd want to keep that car because that car feels more like a pure sports car, like a pure old school M car, whereas this one doesn't. This one feels like this weird middle ground between that and BMW's more modern, more brutish M3 and M4. So I'm not quite sure I'm in love with this. It's very good, it's very impressive, and I do like it. It's a good car, but I don't think it's better than the F87, and I think I've had more fun in the M3 competition. So now I'm kind of in a conundrum. because I want to like this car, I really do. I like everything that it stands for, but I just don't know if I love it as it is. The BMW M2 is a good car, and I have no doubt that countless owners will love and cherish it. On paper, it has all the ingredients of a truly great sports car. A straight 6 engine up front, drive going to the back, and an optional manual gearbox in the middle. However, while the ingredients are there, it seems BMW went a bit too heavy on capability instead of fun. The M2 is an incredibly competent machine, but one that lacks the character and the fun factor of the previous generation. BMW will undoubtedly make it better with the M2 CS, as it seems to save its best efforts for such models, but that leaves the standard M2 lacking a bit. For better or worse though, this is the end of the line for small, straight 6 powered M cars. It isn't perfect, but I'm glad it's here.